You're so dumb. You're so dumb. You also are a transphobe. You know what I'm saying? Unless you also are kind of a misogynist.
I'm going to take Francesca off the network entirely.
This extreme leftist got herself fired after messing around in a truly unprofessional way, and now her tears are simply delicious. We're going to break this down, plus a depressing story that reveals the Democrats have learned absolutely nothing, and another crazy conspiracy theory from the host of The View, plus so much more. On today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where we take on the craziest ideas from across our media, our politics, and the internet, all from an independent perspective. Up first, like I mentioned, we're going to talk about one of the most toxic progressive people on YouTube, a very extreme podcaster and YouTube creator named Francesca Fiorentini. She's this ultra woke YouTuber who was affiliated with the Young Turks and honestly has some of the most extreme takes I've ever seen on certain issues, like the trans sports debate. She doesn't just argue that trans women should be allowed to compete in women's sports even though they're biologically male and have an advantage. She basically argues sex isn't real and sports should just be a free-for-all. I'm not really even exaggerating. Take a listen to this clip.
I'm a big Messi fan, but let me just explain this
answer my question. Would you allow him, if he said I'm a woman, to play in the American women's national team?
You're using the wrong pronoun
Yes, right now. Hell yeah, are you kidding me?
And destroy women's football forever. You'd let Usain Bolt...
it'd be very difficult to get a ticket, which would suck.
I want to do a little checklist here. You'd let Usain Bolt compete as a sprinter in the American women's Olympic team?
Yes.
Okay, you would let Floyd Mayweather compete as a boxer in the women's American boxing team?
She also has an argument style that I find to be extremely abrasive and very kind of lowbrow and ad hominem and not very sophisticated or interesting. But that's neither here nor there for the story we're going to discuss today, which is her much-deserved downfall at the progressive streaming and YouTube network, the Young Turks, where until very recently, she was a contributor, meaning she was contracted to make regular appearances and paid for those appearances, but she just got yanked from the network, according to the Young Turks founder, Cenk Uyghur.
Recently, Francesca Fiorentini asked us at TYT to take her podcast, Habituation Room, off the network, and we happily agreed to that. And today, I'm going a little further, and I'm going to take Francesca off the network entirely. So you won't see her on any of the TYT shows going forward.
Now, Francesca is now spinning this as if the Young Turks are the crazy ones, and they fired her for having different opinions than the hosts, because the main hosts, Cenk and Anna Kasparian, have taken somewhat, they're still very progressive, they've taken somewhat more moderate or nuanced positions on things like trans athletes in sports, on crime, on immigration, still solidly liberal, but just not all the way off the left-wing extreme. And they've made a concerted effort to reach out to people on the right, doing conservative podcasts, talking to different audiences, all of that, which did not apparently sit well with Francesca, who was an employee at this network, yet decided to not just disagree, not just offer her own take, which I think would have been totally allowed, but publicly, personally attack and insult her boss repeatedly. She suggested that he was akin to some sort of Nazi or fascist collaborator. She said his brain was broken, and then, craziest of all, she said this.
You're so dumb. You're so dumb. I don't even know how to explain this to you anymore. Unless, this is the other option, unless you also are a transphobe. You know what I'm saying? Unless you also are kind of a misogynist. Because you look like a bitch. You know what I'm saying? You look like a bitch. That's what it is. Like, that's just what it comes down to. You don't look like a fighter. You don't look smart. You look like a bitch.
So, shocker, she just got fired from the Young Turks, which is the completely predictable and incredibly well-deserved consequence of her own immature, petty, and unprofessional actions. Guys, the story gets a lot crazier and more unhinged, and we'll go over that after this. You don't want to end up like these fat positivity influencers.
Just because I'm fat, that doesn't invalidate the things that I say.
She died.
You ready to get supersized?
She died too.
Today I've got the big Fruit Loop.
He's dead. Join me on my Fat Positive radio show, which didn't last long because she died.
Maintaining a healthy weight, keeping your energy levels up, and feeling better in your body is so important. And that's why I'm happy to share today's sponsor, Lumen. All you have to do is breathe into your Lumen first thing in the morning, and you'll know what's going on with your metabolism, whether you're burning mostly fats or carbs. Then Lumen gives you a personalized nutrition plan for that day based on your measurements. You can also breathe into it before and after workouts and meals, so you know exactly what's going on in your body in real time. And Lumen will give you tips to keep you on top of your health game. So if you want to take the next step in improving your health, go to lumen.me/Brad to get 20% off your Lumen. That is LUMEN.me/BRAD for 20% off your purchase. Thanks to Lumen for sponsoring this episode. And now back to today's show. She's seriously suggesting that the Young Turks hosts are the crazy ones and that they're just blinded by their ideology and can't handle disagreement. Take a listen to a clip from her video reacting to the announcement of her termination.
You know when you meet someone and they swear that all of their exes were psychos, and then you slowly realize that, oh wait, I'm talking to the person who was the problem in the relationship? Unrelatedly, the Young Turks. Cenk Uyghur, the head of TYT, recently hath forboden me from appearing on any TYT shows.
It's the audacity and the entitlement from her that drives me a little bit crazy. First off, she is the most closed-minded person I've ever seen. I watch Piers Morgan all the time, and when she's on there, she interrupts, she doesn't listen to people, she calls people names, she's very immature, and she has these very extreme positions, which I don't necessarily have an issue with. People have a right to their own opinion. Even if it's extreme, we can talk about it. But she is not open to other people's views without quickly accusing them of being stupid, bitches, fascist collaborators, and worse. So for her to levy that charge against Cenk and Anna, who say whatever you want about them, and I disagree with them on so many things. I certainly think Cenk doesn't always conduct himself in the most mature or civilized way when it comes to political debates. He gets very angry and screams a lot, but he's at least made an effort to talk to different people, to moderate somewhat, to reach out to disaffected communities because they do believe in democracy and they know they have to win people over if they want their side to ultimately win the day. I can have some respect for that, but for her to make that accusation of them that they can't do that is ironic because that's literally her. And I think we just have, honestly, an epidemic of audacity and entitlement in this country. The idea that you have a right to work at a company and publicly trash your boss, call them names, call them stupid, imitate and mock them. Honestly, the Young Turks is already being generous, or at least open-minded, by allowing their hosts to publicly disagree with the founder and CEO, Cenk Uyghur. She's allowed to do that. She can say, oh, Cenk has this position on trans sports. I disagree. Here's my position. They would allow that. Not all media companies would allow that. Now, they should if they believe in open debate, but even that is quite something. But there is no serious place of employment in the world that would allow you to publicly insult and demean and name call your boss, and they just keep sending you checks. Also, by the way, this is how I know she doesn't really have these strong feelings she keeps portraying. Why are you taking their checks, right? If they're so bad and they're fascist enablers, you're taking their money to appear on their network, to enrich yourself and promote your own brand. If you really had these strong moral objections, you wouldn't be doing that. I think in reality, she got noticed by picking, she's been doing this for decades and doesn't have that big a following. It's not insignificant, and no shade to smaller content creators, but her most attention came when she fought with Cenk. So she just kept getting more and more extreme with him. And guess what? You played yourself, and now you're out of a job. Now, she does have gigs with other media companies. Don't really know what they see in her, but that's their prerogative. But the reason this story interests me is because I'm seeing so many people online act as if she's some sort of a victim, or the Young Turks is in the wrong here, or attacking her free speech, or anything like that. None of that is true. And society, at least chunks of it, has become so incredibly delusionally entitled and audacious to even believe that you have some right to employment at a place, no matter how disrespectful and unprofessional you are in the workplace towards your boss. That is insane. And if people truly believe that, a lot of young people online, the audience of the Young Turks or of her podcast or whatever, they're in for a rude awakening, because that is not how the real world works, and it's not how it ever should work either. What do you guys think? Do you somehow feel bad for this woman, or do you side with Cenk and Anna on this one? Let me know in the comments. Do hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet. Up next, it really seems like Democrats have learned absolutely nothing. At least vice presidential nominee and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, if his recent comments made at a Texas event featuring former congressman and failed presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke, well, if Tim Walz's comments here are anything to go by, they've learned nothing, and they're in for a very, very rude awakening in the political future. Here is the main thing Tim Walz said that, honestly, I was a little bit stunned by. Take a listen.
The question is, how do we speak about and plan for the inclusivity and diversity of opinion that we need to rebuild this country when those terms are being so demonized by the people holding power right now?
Well, Sammy, thank you. And to all the young people who are here, I just pause for a moment and look around and look at, I'm especially talking about these old white guys who seem to disappoint us on a regular basis in this country, but not this group. Not this group. We let them define the issue on immigration. We let them define the issue on DEI, and we let them define what woke is. We got ourselves in this mess because we weren't bold enough to stand up and say, you damn right we're proud of these policies. We're going to put them in, and we're going to execute them.
Y'all, I almost struggle to believe he's serious. His notion, his idea, is that the Democrats should double down on wokeness and DEI, identitarian stuff. That they should embrace that harder and embrace their position on immigration, which was a hot mess under Joe Biden, even harder. And he thinks that's what's going to help them win. Is he insane? Does he know nothing about what motivated voters and what they were explicit about rejecting at the ballot box? People don't want that. They might not necessarily want all the super right-wing stuff Trump is doing, but they don't want that either. And they can't give it up, this toxic identity politics. He's asked a question about, how do we sanitize DEI? How do we make it acceptable again and stand to these values? And immediately makes a joke crapping on white men. This is like when Jasmine Crockett, the new rising star, went off about mediocre white boys. Newsflash, white men are a huge part of this country. Pretty important part, with a lot of votes. And I mean, you look at how even young men, even young minority men, swung massively towards Trump this past election. It's because they feel, and they're not wrong to have perceived this, at least in online and media circles and education and colleges, that the Democratic Party or the left of center establishment and ethos doesn't like them or looks down on them for things about them they can't change and didn't choose, like simply being a man or being white or being heterosexual, God forbid any of these heinous things. That is cancerous politics. And anybody, no matter how far left they are, that just can see these things clearly should understand that. But the guy they just put up as VP thinks they just need to do woke harder. They've learned nothing, as far as I can tell, and they will continue to lose. And I just get so frustrated with the Democrats because I don't know that they really believe any of the things that they say they believe. At least a lot of I think rank and file Democrats, so voters, people you meet on the street, your aunt, your uncle, I think they genuinely hold a lot of these beliefs. But I think a lot of the elected officials are complete and utter frauds, like Tim Walz apparently is, because remember all that hubbub about Republicans are a threat to democracy and they are election deniers and all this. I thought they overstated it at times for sure, but I agreed with them on the central thrust of that criticism. I've always thought Trump lost in 2020. Maybe the election wasn't perfectly fair in some ways, but frankly, the elections never are. And I thought the pity party and the attempt to reverse the result and all of that was disgraceful. So Democrats, in my book, have always had a legitimate criticism of the Trump Republicans about not believing in democracy. But do they really believe in it themselves? Take a listen to this.
I hope they all have seen the reports from cybersecurity experts that they've released analyses of election data out of Clark County, Nevada, that shows some pretty convincing evidence of election tampering. My biggest fear is that we're not going to make it to the midterms. So what can we do to make sure, A, that the midterms actually happen, and B, that they're free of fraud?
Yeah. Well, this one's the core. We saw just recently Donald Trump's executive order to make it more difficult, specifically to women, trying to make it more difficult for women to be able to vote. We see one of the first things they do is try and restrict the vote. This is one of the things, though, that this is going to take power to the streets.
So this lady comes up here with these harebrained, fact-free conspiracy theories about them hacking the votes, and he just basically slightly dodges it and kind of affirms that they're going to do better and compete better. Really? Y'all are the democracy warriors. You can't tell this woman, no, I'm sorry, we lost fair and square. I'm not going to go down that conspiracy rabbit hole. We've got to be better than the Republicans. No, you just dodge it and move on, because they don't actually believe this stuff, at least not at a particularly deep or principled level. I will never forget this. I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and we had a moderate Republican congressman here, Peter Meyer. I know him a little. He's a good guy. Don't agree with him on everything. But, he's a guy, a good character, a moderate Republican type. He voted to certify the 2020 election results. And that made the MAGA hardcore base, at least some of it, very upset. So they ran a primary challenger against him for the Republican nomination when he ran for Congress again, named John Gibbs, who was like, you can't imagine a more radical and fringe person than this. I mean, he had disturbing views on women and all sorts of things, and he was an election truther. So you had this very close primary contest where this moderate Republican was running against this very fringe MAGA Republican who was an election denier. And it was super close. It came down to just a couple percentage points. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, the DCCC, you can look this up, came in with huge funding in favor of John Gibbs, the election denier, and against the Republican who did the right thing and certified the results, to help John Gibbs narrowly win the nomination, which he did, because they thought he would be easier to beat in the general election. And he was. They did win that seat. And Meyer might have kept that seat or beaten the Democrats. But they chose incredibly cynical political calculations over any pretense of believing in democracy and the rule of law and how important these things are. If you actually gave a crap about any of that, you wouldn't actively promote election-denying Republicans and sabotage and harm the careers of those who did the right thing. You'd do the opposite of that. And Democrats did this across the country in races and elections in 2022. It was an incredibly profound disgrace, and I'll never forget it, because it just was kind of the nail in the coffin that when you hear elected officials, 95% of them, when they say these grandiose values they believe in, it is all BS. They will say and shift and do anything to get close to power. Many of them are narcissists, and they will simply do anything and contort themselves into however many pretzels to get there. That's why I'll probably never run for office. Some of you guys ask me about are you going to run for something? Like, why do y'all hate me and want me to suffer? And two, I'm too honest to ever get elected or win, because I actually say what I think, and I have certain things I believe in that I wouldn't just flip to win an election or get a donor, so I wouldn't have a shot anyway. Now, just one final thing from this big event that he did down in Texas, that I'm sorry, you could not waterboard this information out of me. He told the story about him and his 18-year-old son that was hilarious, but embarrassing. I don't know why you would tell people this voluntarily. Take a listen.
I got an 18-year-old, Gus, and I'm with Gus out there, and I'm having one of those dad talks with him. I was giving Gus my wisdom on what he had done wrong. Because I know these things, right? I'm the dad. In the middle of it, he gives me the old, says the guy who got his ass kicked by Donald Trump. And I'm like, okay.
I will say it again. You could not waterboard that information out of me. That is really funny, but very embarrassing and kind of emasculating as a father that your teenage son just disrespects you and sasses you like that. And look, I know that happens, but why would you volunteer that information? Of course, MAGA is running with this clip and dunking on it because it's hilarious and you just owned yourself. You just committed an own goal on live television. Like, what is this dude thinking? You don't give your enemies food and fuel to dunk on you with. And it's telling that even the children of Democratic Party officials, like the teenagers, Gavin Newsom has a teenage son who loves Charlie Kirk, are leaning Republican. Like Gen Z is, or even young Gen Alpha is swinging far to the right, or to maybe not far, but more to the right. When we used to have young people always being, the most liberal ones, all of a sudden we have a ton of young people who are swinging to the right significantly. And that's a very surprising development that I'll probably go over in more depth soon. But if even the kids of these people are feeling this way, that's a good sign that most of their generation, or a huge chunk of it, is, because they're surely inundated with Democrat agenda and beliefs all around them, and maybe they rebel against that a little bit, but also it's pretty remarkable that they're dunking on him like that. And again, I can't get over it. Why would you voluntarily offer up that information? Other than that, though, other than a couple tiny little things, Tim Walz and the Democrats are just doing amazing. All right, guys, now we'll run through some quick hits to wrap up today's show. Up first, one of the hosts of The View is spreading a wild conspiracy theory as to why Republicans and the Trump administration are trying to get rid of the Department of Education. Take a listen to this.
And why do they want to gut education? Because a less educated America is a permanent working underclass. You can pay those people a lot less. You can make a lot more that way.
And control them.
And you can control them. And that's why when you look at the stats, and I got some flack for saying college educated people voted in vast numbers for Democrats, whereas non-college educated people voted for Republicans. Well, we're seeing that come to pass, right? Mm-hmm. Those that are non-college educated are parts, it's the reason why Trump said, I like the highly uneducated. I'm loosely quoting that, but he wants
the poorly educated.
I like the poorly educated, because the more educated you are, the more critical thinking skills you may have. I'm not talking about self-educated people who read. I'm just talking about people our public school system is failing them. Those are the people that are going to be harmed the most. Most. If Democrats were really, really smart, they would really figure out a way to provide free college education for everyone. That's what Joe Biden was trying to do. That's why he wanted to get rid of that student debt, because the more educated your country is, the more you understand what is at stake in terms of your vote.
Oof. Guys, I love how people like Sunny Hostin will sometimes correctly even accuse Republicans of being the people who read fake news and push conspiracy theories. Then they'll drop the most delulu conspiracy theories you've ever heard. Newsflash, Sunny. Trump is not wanting to get rid of the Department of Education. That's not some new thing. Republicans have been wanting to do that for decades, because it's a relatively new federal department with no actual authorization in the Constitution that is mostly just bureaucracy. It doesn't hire teachers or educate people. That's all state and local. It manages student loans, a bunch of regulations and bureaucracy, and spends a ton of money. And they want what they're described as doing is taking the student loan stuff, taking the civil rights stuff, and a couple other important functions of it, moving them to other departments, and then shutting it down. So nobody will be getting less educated. There'll just be less bureaucracy and less taste. That's not a horror story. And even if you disagree with it, it is not part of some broad conspiracy to make America less educated so they vote for Republicans. And the elitism is just dripping from her commentary here. It is off the charts. I have a college degree. Honestly, very little of it I use in my actual job. I learned far more in my first year on the job as a journalist about writing and politics than I did in 3 years studying economics and political science, okay? A lot of people don't go to college and end up as just as smart or just as capable of critical thinking as people that did go to college. It's not a sign necessarily of intelligence, especially because so many college degrees are a joke now. It is just hilarious and deeply ironic to me that people like Sunny Hostin think they are in a position to give Democrats advice about what they need to do to win back voters when it's the media elites and the out-of-touch woke progressives like Sunny Hostin who are the reason that Democrats are so unpopular and so underwater in the first place. This was truly wild stuff, y'all. Honestly, wild. Up next, this protester interviewed by News Nation thinks property destruction is perfectly okay. Take a listen.
Destruction of property is a perfectly viable source of protest. No harming humans, obviously. Yeah. Human life is sacred no matter whose it is. But property these are just things. These are just cars.
Excuse me? Ma'am, what? You may feel slightly different when I burn your house down or somebody burns your house down. Oh, it's just property, babe. No one got hurt. Oh, it's just your things. It doesn't really matter. That is an absolutely wild, incredibly out of touch and privileged take. I imagine she'd feel differently if somebody vandalized the home or car that she has, all right? Imagine she'd feel very differently, especially when they're vandalizing these Teslas to protest a CEO who the individual owner of the car probably or maybe doesn't even support. It's just random acts of crime targeting your neighbors. And she's all about that and thinks, oh, that's totally fine. And I'm sorry also, but not only is that immoral and evil and demented stuff, you cannot draw this line between property destruction and violence against people neatly the way she's trying to draw it, because destruction of property very often ends up in people getting hurt. People throwing a Molotov cocktail into a Tesla dealership or into an electric vehicle that could be combustible, somebody could get hurt by that. It's not just stuff. We saw this with the Black Lives Matter riots. It started as peaceful protests. It turned into violent riots where, oh, it was just property damage. Tell that to all the businesses and bars and restaurants that were permanently put out of business by it. But regardless, the property destruction and chaos bleeds into actual violence. Dozens of people were killed, security guards, criminals themselves, police officers, and the like during those riots and that looting. You cannot neatly separate these two things because chaos and violence towards property bleeds into violence against people, almost invariably, if unchecked. These people make me want to pull my hair out because so many of them just seem utterly incapable of thinking about things if the shoe is on the other foot. Like, really, it's no big deal. It's just property. I'm never going to wish anything bad on people, and so I honestly don't hope this happens, but I know this woman would feel differently if it was her home or her car targeted. It's not just stuff. Anyway, up next, this woke TikToker is not coping well. Take a listen to this kind of wild video.
Get a gun. Get a gun right now.
Okay, I mean, I support the Second Amendment, self-defense for everyone, black, white, rainbow-colored, whatever. But I'm a little concerned about where this may be going.
Get your little cousin, your 18-year-old cousin who ain't got no record, make that motherfucker buy two. Get a gun right now. Get extra ammo.
Pretty sure you just described a crime, having somebody else buy a gun and give it to you so you can circumvent the process. Yeah, that's illegal, but okay.
Take that rent money and get a gun, bitch. They don't intend to leave us free. They don't intend to leave us free. Get a gun, bitch! Get it now!
What? This person thinks they, which I'm gonna assume she means the Trump administration, don't intend to leave us free, referring to the black community, presumably. That's who this video is entitled to. Are you seeing and hearing things? Because look, you could disagree with so many things Trump's doing, but the idea that he's going to bring back slavery, which it's not even just this one woman. They keep saying this kind of thing all over social media, is insane. It has no basis in reality. This dude is uplifting black people to his cabinet. And you think he's going to bring back slavery? What? Again, I'm not against people owning guns, but you shouldn't be arming up in mass preparation to resist the government over something you're literally hallucinating. That is a problem to be most preferably spoken about with a recognized mental health counselor, not all of Black TikTok. Y'all, I'm getting worried. about some of these people. I mean, I don't know what I'm saying. I've been worried. All right, everybody. That's it for this episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please do make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet. Do hit that like button before you go. Do comment with your thoughts. I do read the comments, and I love hearing what you guys have to say. Thanks again to Lumen for sponsoring this today's video, and we'll talk again real soon.